Today we're turning to the landscape and building hillsides and tunnels. Hi, welcome back to Chadwick Model Railway. I'm Charlie, and today you join me on a bit of landscape construction, and it's around this area here, the southeastern end of the TMD. Here's a quick overview if you're not familiar with the layout of this board. So we have a TMD area and at the bottom there is a bulk fuel installation. As we work our way down through the TMD, you can see on the far left hand side there's a Western with some TTA wagons going up the far end. We can see a head shunt with a buffer stop and then a loop going around the back end of that engine shed. The loop splits into two reverse loop lines and they come down and they're joined by the lines to and from Helix 2, which now rise up parallel to them, and then coming up as they draw level they meet through a set of points and then they all come through this proposed tunnel mouth. Now here are those 4 tracks, and my original proposal was to cover these 4 tracks up with a large Freightliner depot coming out down this way. I've since revised that idea to a freight depot rather than a Freightliner depot. But the problem is this depot would cover these 2 lines to and from the Helix. They are quite attractive lines when you see locos going to and from the Helix going down or up these lines. And also from that tunnel mouth round to and about here, it's between about 6-7 feet. So it's another 6 or 7 feet of moving trains that you just wouldn't see. So we lose some interaction with some of the stuff that's going on. Now, chatting with a good friend of mine, we went through these details yesterday, and one of the problems is the location of that point back there. And if I was to move that point, then this area would be opened up. I could move these tracks around slightly, which gives a better function here for a tunnel mouth, and I can do away with that tunnel mouth over there. Construct a board over the top of these, leaving these ones in the open, and then the whole layout would be that much better, much more aesthetically pleasing. And the other thing is, when you view it from the other side of the TMD, you could see trains coming in and going from the Helix, and from this point of view here, again, it's more aesthetically pleasing. Of course, trains need to somehow get into this area for this revised sort of staging. Well, they do it on top of this Celotex. So this is a single track affair that will come around here onto the new boards, and trains will come both in on that track and depart, so it'd be bi-directional running. Now, I briefly mentioned about moving this point and doing away with this tunnel mouth. So that's worth an explanation. So removing this curved point and instead inserting a medium radius left-hand point here would allow me to take this track and make it curve much earlier, and it would be more of a gentle curve. This track here would then come off of the point and be run parallel, so those 2 tracks would run down there towards the Helix. And then finally this track here would then go straight on into the 2 reverse loops, and I can then put in a more realistic tunnel mouth. And the whole thing then will hang together much more realistically. It's that time of year again for the Hornby Magazine Awards, and once more there is a YouTuber category, and if you'd like to honour me with your vote, then you'll find the link in the Show More tab. So that just leaves a couple more pieces of the jigsaw. So we need, excuse the crudeness here, a tunnel mouth in this area here, so that the trains going to and from the Helix will kind of disappear underneath this new hillside. And finally we will need some form of tunnel mouth over on the eastern side. So that's the plan, but let's first build it with bubble wrap. Now I'm sure to some that using bubble wrap to give an impression might seem a bizarre idea, but at least now I can sort of draw a line out where I need the hill to start, and the height of the hill needs to be about 5 inches at the top, because the Celotex I'm using is a 3-inch slab and a 2-inch slab, so that will give me the right 5 inches for the freight yard level. So I've marked it out on the board of where my edges are going to be, so I just now need to cut some Celotex up and to give it a sort of a blend, and I got the general size of the hillside now, and without doing this you'll be sort of making it up. But anyway, it was just an idea and it just seems sort of quite reasonable, especially around here where you can see where the hill has to come out to meet the wing of the tunnel portal. Right, let's get rid of this and cut some Celotex. Now clearly this is where it gets messy, and I use a Stanley Fat Max 300mm saw, because when I cut the Celotex outside it makes less mess than an ordinary sort of wood saw. And to glue it down I use sort of mastic type glues, and this one's called Sticks Like, and it used to have a rather rude name after that if you remember, but I think they had to do away with it, but hey ho. And all I do is whap some of this on the Celotex. Try my best not to get this t-shirt dirty. This is my old one. Pop it into place, and when you take the silver paper off, it has some movement in it. You know, you can sort of bend and move this stuff. It's quite malleable really, and you can clamp it. Easy as that. It's just a case really of using it like a jigsaw, trying to piece the pieces together, and then that way you're not sort of doing too much carving in situ, as it were. I've found that otherwise you just get the whole room in a hell of a mess, which I have done before. Anyway, that will soon go off with a bit of luck. I'll just do the rest. Well, it's now the following morning and this stuff has dried overnight, and I clamped it and weighted it down, and as you can see I've also cleared away all the buildings and rolling stock from this end of the layout, because when it comes to finishing off these curves with plaster cloth and all the rest of it, it's going to get rather mucky. Now I want to show you the back end here, because I've tried to keep it vertical, because around here will go a wraparound MDF panel. And I've used these MDF panels before around here at the base of the Helix. So the wraparound panel can come round sort of down to here and up to around here, and wrap right around the panel and protect this surface. Now I'm trying to keep this piece here as large as possible because it forms part of the freight yard base. And it's hard to figure out from here actually where the tunnel is going to go. Now clearly I need to trim some of the material off here, so we'll try to err on the side of caution and not take too much off. I'm trying to make it with a marker pen and put a vertical line across it where we need to cut it, and probably just want to take that section out there, and we also need to take a lot of this away, probably from around here going right back to here. They always say measure twice, cut once. but you need to kind of measure it from the underside. I think we've got a safety margin there. Well, this is the last major piece now to go in, so hopefully it'll all be downhill from here. Downhill. Sorry. Oops. Came out a bit fast that time. I ran out of one adhesive, I'd switched to another. I think really they're all much of a muchness, to be perfectly honest. How far does that go? To there. And then the last thing I do, obviously I suppose, is just hoover through to make sure there's no Celotex on the tracks that are going to be hidden by the tunnel. Mistake there, I don't know why I put it up there. I'm obviously losing my mind. And shake it in, let it to bed in. Then once that hardens, we can then trim off the excess and just give it more of a shape. Now, whilst this lot is drying and I leave these weights in place overnight tonight, I was thinking about the retaining wall. Now that's the height of the freight yard, so you've got your a 3-inch slab and a 2-inch slab takes it up to here. Now this is the old retaining walls that I used to use on the original Chadwick, and you can see them here. I also use them in my current videos because they mask off over the back side there where the incline runs up towards, well, actually towards this area here. Now I've managed to peel some of these off. They are a useful commodity, and I'm sorry I can't give you a link or anything. I bought them at a show, but as you can see, they're quite a flimsy, cheap thing. I think they're only about sort of £3 or £4 for a strip of 5. But when I put them on here, as you can see, they're a little short, and I'd need them taller at this end, and then obviously they would sort of diminish in height but remain parallel as you come out of this cutting. The problem is now, of course, is reverting to my glasses. These are only 14.5 centimetres, and I need something that's more like 18. So the hunt will be on for a much larger, or much taller, sorry, retaining wall that will look right as it sort of as the tracks climb out of this cutting. So that's my next plan, is to track something down. I've ordered a tunnel mouth, that should be here in the next day or two, so I can fit that. And then once the tunnel mouth's in, then we can sort of carve this area here into place. I've already got a tunnel mouth, as you've seen on the other side, so that needs to be bedded in. But the next bit really is to get these weights off in the morning and then think about the plaster cloth to get around this section here. You can see here a little cutaway for that MP5 point motor, and I'll put a little bit of cardboard over that, so if it ever goes wrong I know where it is and I can access it. So that's worked out reasonably well, and up to now no real damage, but I've got a lot of vacuuming to do now. But I shall see you in the morning. Now, I did mention that cutting Celotex is a mussy old game, but don't get caught doing this. Well, I think we're now ready to go. I've sort of cut away the excess and make it a little bit more smooth, but obviously hillsides aren't flat, so I've left a few undulations in. I've put some card and sellotaped it down over the hole where that servicing depot goes, so I don't make any muck in there. And just as a matter of interest, I've cut a vertical face in this piece here, as if as the things developed they wanted to put this depot in, so they had to cut away some of the hillside sort of as the depots expanded. I think the thing to remember, of course, is the land would have been here before the railway. Now with the tunnel entrances, I'm not going to fit those currently. I need to make the tunnel lining, because obviously you can't just put the tunnel portal in, because you know it just shows that there's nothing inside. So I need to make some decent card tunnel portals, and I'll do that once all this the messy work has been complete, let's say. Right, now what are we going to use? Now my plaster cloth of choice is from Woodland Scenisc. It's C1203. There may be a link in the show more tab, and all I use is a a paint roller tray for the water. Put it in there, and then don't soak the paper, the cloth too much, otherwise the plaster kind of washes off. And then as you lay it on your landscape, you overlap it by around about 50%, so you get a sort of 2 layers as you work your way along. The thing is with this stuff here is always make sure you're not going to run out, buy 2 rolls, that sort of thing. Yeah, it's all sort of pretty good really, but don't forget to measure it up, cut it to size prior to fitting, because obviously there's a great big roll, so you want to try and work it out before you kick off. Right, let's make some mess. Now here's our roll of plaster cloth, and I've put some water in our container, and I've cut myself off a length of the plaster cloth. And it's not really rocket science, is it? Just dip it in the water, get it wet, and then once it's wet, pick it up, and this is where the messy bit starts. Pop it into place and pull it so you've got all the wrinkles out of the cloth. And you've got it where you need it. And I overlap it onto the front and over the back to give some strength to the top seam, as it were. And then once it's in place, once you've got the wrinkles out, then it's a case of rubbing it with your hand until the sort of plaster sort of comes through the cloth, if you see what I mean, and you get a much smoother finish. It's a case of learning this sort of stuff, isn't it, really? It's all in the technique, but it's all straightforward really, isn't it? At the end of the day, if you get it wrong, it doesn't matter, you can always rip it up and do another one. And then you can see the sort of holes kind of disappear, yeah, all straightforward really. And now it's a case of just working your way along and then sort of overlapping the rolls as you go. Well, I've been going about 20 minutes now, and I think I'm almost complete, to be honest. I think we're almost there. It really doesn't take long at all, and this lot is pretty much gone off. There are a couple of strands that are worth pulling out. Get rid of those. Apart from that, as you can see, it's actually a very simple operation, really. it's just mucky. Whatever happens, when you finish, don't throw the water down the drain, because obviously there's plaster in there, and the last thing you want to do is find that you've bunged up your kitchen sink or whatever with plaster. Right, whole evolution, half an hour. Piece of cake, and it's almost rock hard already. Now, just for a change, it's the day after. This is all rock solid now, it's all gone off, and yes, it is, you know, it is literally rock solid. But the finish on it isn't ideal. You can see where the joins are between the sheets of plaster cloth, but it's no big deal. And if you didn't want to do anything more to this sort of surface, then you could use a fine filler just to take out those sort of blemishes, as it were, and then just paint the whole thing in sort of dark brown or dark green paint to serve as a surface prior to putting on your field type finishes, such as Woodland scenic scatters and that kind of stuff. And then of course you'd put your fences and your bushes and your trees and dress it right up. However, I will mention the plaster cloth. To do this area, I used about a roll and a half of the Woodland Scenic C1203 plaster cloth. So I used, like I say, about a roll and a half to give you an idea of how much you might need if you do a similar project. Right, but what am I going to do with this? Well, I'm a lover of sculptamold, which is a modelling compound, and I've used this in previous videos. And what you do is you mix it with water to the consistency of cottage cheese, and then you sort of smear it all over it. And you tend to use a trowel, but in the end you end up using your fingers because they kind of work better. And then you leave it for a while, sort of 20 minutes, and you go on and do your next bit. And then you go back to your first bit with a wet hand, and then you rub it in, and it becomes like a smooth, glossy finish. And that's the way you work your way along. So that if you use this stuff, don't mix it up in large quantities, because it is quite difficult to go back and then start sort of moving it around. But I shall mix some of this up and show you what I mean. So here it is mixed up, and it's 2 parts sculptamold to 1 part water. And then you could just use you know, a trowel and put it on, but I go for this kind of method here. I just push it on and lay it in with my fingers, and yeah, it's sort of a sort of rudimentary sort of mud pie thing really, but it's a case of getting it into place, and you'll see what I mean. It's an odd commodity, and then it sort of finds its own way, and yeah, it's the finish you'll see that's sort of attractive. Anyway, I won't bore you to death. I shall whack a load of this on and then get back to you. Now I do appreciate that it's difficult to see because it's all white and it kind of burns out in the camera, but hopefully you can see now the difference between the area that I've applied the sculptamold to, and it's actually warm here. It's actually, because obviously it's a chemical reaction as the plaster within this compound dries, it actually gives off heat. But as you can see, it's you can work it so it becomes a much more smooth substance, and there you can see the roughness of the ordinary plaster cloth. People have said to me in the past, why don't you put colour in with the sculptamold? But you need a huge amount, so it's easier just to paint it afterwards. And other people have said, well, why don't you just do away with the plaster and use the sculptamold straight onto the Celotex? But I find that you do need a huge amount of sculptamold then, because of the, you know, the rivets, the dents, and the gaps within the within the Celotex. So this seems to be the easiest way. Now I'm just going to wet my hand, and you can see, I just use this last drop, and you can see the effect of when I wet my hand on it. By wetting my hand, it's you can move it around just a little bit more, and it becomes a little bit more smooth, if that's of course the effect that you're after, which obviously in this case I do. It does take a few days to dry out, so please don't think you can do this and then paint it the following day. It really just needs to go off in its own sweet time. Now if you give this a go, don't get despondent that in the first sort of minute or so it just turned into a big claggy mess like it is now, because in next to no time it will start to go off, the plaster cloth underneath will start to absorb the moisture, a chemical reaction would take place, and it will sort of not instantly harden, but it will kind of certainly stiffen up. And here, you know, what was that, sort of 10 or 15 minutes ago? No, it could have been even that. And this is the last section, because I don't want to carry on with this any further at this stage until I've have certainty of where I'm going to put the tunnel mouth and the rest of the construction of the freight yard boards. And as you can see, it's still very messy here, but in next to no time it will stiffen up and become much more hill-like. And I've used about 3/4 of a bag to give you an idea, and if you've never come across it before, there should be a link along with the plaster cloth in the Show More tab. So there it is, as simple as that. I don't know if I mentioned it, you mix it 2 parts sculptamold to 1 part water, and you just stir it up a couple of times. It should have the consistency, as you saw, of cottage cheese. A word of warning, don't go near the sink with the mixture, because if this stuff goes down the plug hole, obviously you're going to block up your drains forever. So do, whilst you mix it, get the water away from your sink area and mix it up on a worktop. Don't go near the sink. I mean, I'm not talking from experience, it's just common sense, but it's so easy to make that mistake. Right, this should go off and should dry out completely in the next few days, and then I'll give it a coat of paint. Now, to give you an idea of how long this takes to dry, I did this on Saturday morning, and it's now Thursday morning, and there is still some dampness in it. And the room it's not exactly warm, it's about 19 degrees in here, but it does take a long time to dry out. But I would normally hold a little bit longer, but it's sort of dry enough to paint. Besides that, I've got to get this video out, so I've got to paint it really. Now, what we're going to use to paint it with, well, I like these paints here. They are from Hobbycraft. They are children's poster paints, I believe. Quite expensive, they're £1 each, and I sort of go in there and buy a couple of browns, a couple of whites, a couple of blacks, a couple of greens, and they sort of do me through. But yeah, £1 a go, you can't really go wrong. So what I'm going to do is mix up the brown with a touch of white. I just want it a little bit lighter than this, drop of water, and then I'm just going to paint this. So there's a little drop of water in my container, in goes my brown. Give it a bit of a whisk. And I don't know what you think, but I just think that's just a little bit too dark. So a little zap of white in there, and it takes up to more of a earthy, an earthy colour really. And great thing about when you paint these things is, in the fullness of time, when you're doing your scenics and you find that you chip your scenics off, you know, whether it be woodland scenics type scatters, then you're not going to reveal the white sculptamold underneath. You're going to give it, you know, you have some colour protection by painting it a dark earthy colour, as it were. And I find with these paints, they always tend to dry lighter than they appear when you put them down. So whilst it might appear to be a bit dark, it's no big shakes, because it should dry a little lighter. This is very much a sort of slap it on attitude here. At the end of the day, it's just a base coat and another work in progress, but you get the general idea. Now my tunnel mouth has arrived, and it was a little bit wide, so I've cut sort of 5 centimetres up and then a centimetre in. I cut out a section both sides, and then it can snugly fit in around here. And that seems to be the sort of ideal location for it to be. Obviously now I can sort of, when I'm constructing this freight yard here, I can then landscape it down, and obviously this needs to be built up a section. I need to change that a little bit, cut some of this away, and then we can make the hillside come out and duck down slowly onto there, and we should be good to go. So let's run a couple of trains and see what it looks like. Now, as you can see, I left some sort of cutaways behind the area so I can at least get in there and clean the track, and if we have any sort of major derailments, then we have access to get to our locomotives. And this is now going to be underneath the new freight yard. And then viewing it from the other camera angle across the TMD, it's a nice little vista looking across. Well, that's stage 1 complete, really. Stage 2 will be at the other end there, where I can reconfigure those points and change that track work around. And then stage 3 will obviously be the laying of the upper freight yard and the Celotex and the track work and all that sort of stuff to crack on with that. So exciting times ahead between now and Christmas to get the last piece of track work at Chadwick laid. Good, all exciting stuff. Now, I was left a comment by a viewer who said that he's missing out on certain videos and some of the content doesn't appear to be there. And I asked if he was a subscriber, and he said no, he doesn't want to become a subscriber. And I kind of understand that you don't necessarily want to give Google and YouTube all your details, but there's no way of doing it. There's no way of getting consistent feeds to you unless you subscribe. Unless, of course, you want to become a patron. The patrons get these videos 24 hours before everybody else, and they're also ad-free. That's the sort of advantage there. Anyway, you know, you either open an account or you don't. I can't really, you know, you can't really push videos out to people who don't want to subscribe, but that's the way it is. And down in the Show More tab is the link to the Hornby magazine awards, and if you could lend me your vote, I'd be very appreciative. And in the meantime, what can I do bar thank the patrons who make it all possible? There's the subscriber button. Remember, subscribing is free, and a video here and here, and I'll see you in 2 weeks' time. Thanks, I'll take care. Bye-bye.